Everyone is hearing this okay? We're going to give it a few seconds for the audience to gather. And ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to talk about Cleantech and cannabis. What's new? What's next? I'm Lolla Stovall, Counsel at Zuber Lawler. I handle corporate transactions and M&A work, focusing on energy and cannabis-related transactions. I also co-lead the firm's Cleantech practice, and if you notice my accent, this was a clever hack by our marketing department to make sure everyone pays attention and stays awake. We appreciate each one of you for taking the time to tune in and attend. And to get to know you a little bit better, we will shortly run a brief poll. Thank you in advance for your participation. Many of you are familiar with Zuber Lawler due to its well-established cannabis practice. About 15 years ago, Zuber Lawler took pride in learning everything there was to know about cannabis and in sharing that knowledge before marijuana law became mainstream. What you may not know is that the firm is also nurturing and growing many other innovative niche practices. After cannabis came cryptocurrency, then e-gaming, non-fungible tokens, psychedelics, and many more niches, including Cleantech. In addition, we pride ourselves on being the connectors and bringing together clients and contacts across various industries. So today with us, here are Beckerling, Director, CEO, and co-founder of Agri-Smart Engineering, Hadi Feltham, the VP of Business Development for Pure Life Carbon, Forrest Cohn, President of Utopian Power, Gary Evans, Chairman and CEO of Generation Hemp, and of course, our esteemed moderator, Jackim. Janet, thank you so much for allowing me to introduce you today.
Thank you, Lola. Appreciate it.
Janet is my personal role model. And if you let me recount all of Janet's accomplishments, we're going to be here all day. So I'll keep it short, but I encourage you to check out Zuber Lolla website and look at Janet's bio. Ms. Jackim is based in Phoenix, Arizona, and she's actively engaged in shaping the future of the Arizona cannabis industry. Janet serves on the board of directors of Arizona Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, and some of Janet's other credits, past and present, include serving on the legal committee of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws and as secretary of the Arizona Cannabis Bar Association. Though located in Arizona, Janet's expertise draws clients from across all of the United States. At Zuber Lawler, Janet is head of the cannabis practice and one of the firm's select new equity partners. Janet's practice embraces a variety of sophisticated transactions and includes M&A work, business restructuring, dispensary certificate applications, partner dispute resolutions, and other complex legal work in the cannabis sector. Janet's clients are some of the very well-known names in this industry and include multi-state operators, dispensaries, producers, cultivators, investors, and banks. Thank you, Janet, for making the time today to moderate for us. And the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Lola, and thank you to our panelists. This webinar today is about Cleantech and cannabis. What's new? What's next? I'd like to just give a short introduction, laying the foundation for today's panelists' discussions. Seemingly overnight, in the US, Canada, and other nations across the world, the cannabis industry has grown into a booming business or into an emerging market soon to become a booming business. In the US, for example, 37 states and the District of Columbia allow medical use of cannabis. And 18 states and the District of Columbia have enacted measures for adult use cannabis. I just want to add a postscript to those numbers. The numbers may not be current because at the speed of change in the United States with respect to cannabis laws is accelerating and constant change is on the horizon. So those numbers may need to be updated on a daily basis. Across the world, it's the same. Uruguay made international news in 2013 when it became the first country in the world to fully legalize cannabis. Germany for its predicted market expansion, and Malta for fully legalizing medical and adult use cannabis changed the discussion on cannabis use in Europe. Mexico is on the edge of enacting regulations for adult use. South Africa is crafting a national strategy to industrialize and commercialize cannabis. And so it goes around the planet. This green wave is predicted to hit $35 billion in sales this year throughout the world. And by 2026, the cannabis analytics firm BDSA predicts sales will be greater than $60 billion on the planet. However, as Zuber Lawler's Lolla Stovall has written in her March 2, 2022 law update, which you can see posted on our website at www.zuberlawler.com, increasing sales require increasing production, and as production increases, relative environmental issues increase concerning cannabis cultivation and production. Simply put, cannabis is creating a substantial and potentially problematic carbon footprint. Today, our esteemed speakers are tackling that very problem. They are contributing their creative talents, time, effort, and money in embracing renewable energy solutions. So now I would like to introduce today's panelists. Let's start at the ground with the grower on our panel and its Cleantech contributions. Our first panelist is Constant Beckerling, Director and CEO of Agri-Smart Engineering Limited, located in Johannesburg, South Africa. A chemical engineer and an entrepreneur, Constant describes his company's novel lighting solutions as disruptive to the cannabis industry. Hear, hear, Constant. Constant co-founded Agri-Smart Engineering just a few years ago with mechanical, computing, and electronics engineer and his longtime friend, Anlo Van Wyk. Agri-Smart Engineering develops agri-tech aimed at mitigating human-induced climate change and sustainable cultivation industries. Its main technological outputs include custom LED lighting, recirculating hydroponic systems, and data management systems. Agri-Smart received a special recognition award for technology development in the biosciences category of the Watang South Africa Accelerator Program in 2020. The innovation was a fully automated smart hydroponic system for cannabis cultivation. We next turn to Hadi Feltham, the VP of Business Development for Pure Life Carbon, an Alberta, Canada company whose mission is to increase crop yields, grow cleaner and healthier foods, and make the agricultural industry more sustainable. Hadi is also president and owner of Square Foot Grow Systems, which provides a holistic approach to providing sustainable building design solutions. Hadi has had 25 years of sales training and business management experience, focusing on alternative agriculture methods, construction, and retail environments. Pure Life's flagship product is charged carbon, the world's first and only carbon negative zero waste grow medium. Our third panelist is Forrest Cohn, president of Utopian Power, located in Michigan. Forrest possesses a unique combination of hands-on field experience and academic training in renewable energy. Forrest has science and renewable energy engineering degrees from Michigan State and the University of Colorado. Forrest focuses on utilizing undervalued and overlooked resources around the world to help maintain and sustain a healthy environment. Utopian Power provides environmentally responsible, renewable energy options to meet electricity demands. Utopian Power also strives to connect renewable energy investors with energy projects to create value for both the investor and the operator. And finally, we turn to introducing panelist Gary Evans, Chairman and CEO of Generation Hemp, located in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. Gen Hemp is a publicly held pure play hemp company founded by Gary. And Gary is the serial entrepreneur whose business foundations began in the non-renewable natural gas and oil sectors. Today, Gary's Generation Hemp company is collaborating with a leading player in the Bitcoin hardware resale business to develop the first diversified green energy project for Bitcoin mining using hemp biomass as a biofuel feedstock to power the mining equipment. Gary has been repeatedly recognized by the energy sector as Entrepreneur of the Year and was inducted into the World Hall of Fame by Ernst & Young. Gary was chosen by Finance Monthly in 2013 as one of the most respected CEOs. Throughout his career, Gary has raised various forms of capital on Wall Street, exceeding $7 billion, and has served for 24 years as a director of Novavax, the NASDAQ NASDAQ-listed clinical stage vaccine biotechnology company, having issued a famous COVID-19 vaccine, which has a market cap in excess of $15 billion. So as you can see from these brief bios, these gentlemen truly represent subject matter experts on clean tech, cannabis, and future developments in this space. And we wish a welcome to our panelists. What I'd like to do first is take a few minutes to give each of our panelists an opportunity to describe his company's contributions to clean tech and or cannabis as of today. And then we'll close with the same group, of course, talking about his predictions for 5 years from now, for 20 years from now in the cannabis and clean tech areas. So Gary, want to lead us off? Tell us about Gen Hemp.
Great, thank you for your time, and thank you all for dialing in and listening to our webinar today. We have a great panel that I feel honored to be a part of. So Generation Hemp, as you said, is a pure play hemp company, and being public, we're not allowed to be involved in marijuana in any form or fashion because, as you know, marijuana is not legal nationally. It's legal in various states from a medical recreational use, but not in a national level. On the inverse, hemp was approved at the 2018 Farm Bill with the execution of that bill by former President Trump, is now a legal substance nationwide and approved by all 50 states as well. So our focus is predominantly in the southeastern U.S., Kentucky, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama area. We are what we call ourselves a midstream company. So what that means is farmers grow the hemp, they bring it to us in super sacks, we dry it, clean it, strip it, pull the flower out, get it ready for extraction, and then we use that biomass material that is left over to make products. And the current products that we're making today are animal bedding, sold on Amazon, called Rowdy Rooster. And then we also have just launched a new oil cleanup under the name of Gas Monkey. Richard Rawlings' show is marketing that product, and we have several more coming in this year, 2022. But as you mentioned, we are trying something a bit novel. Our biomass is a business that's been around the United States for a long time. Predominantly, wood waste is used as a feedstock for biomass to burn and make electricity for either the grid or for various industries. So we got the bright idea, well, we have all this excess biomass from hemp, why not burn that? So we checked the BTU values, very similar to wood. So we are now putting in a 2 megawatt biomass facility at our location in Western Kentucky that will burn biomass to generate electricity for Bitcoin. And if you've been involved in the Bitcoin business at all, you'll know that that industry is a super user of electricity and has created some problems throughout the world on the grid. And by generating clean, renewable energy with biomass, we're going to augment that with solar. We think that we're onto something maybe a bit novel with respect to that industry. So we will be looking at various projects around the United States to try to put these 2, 5, 10 megawatt systems in place. And we're very excited about being able to do something that, as you said, I was in the fossil fuel business for 35 years. So now I'm kind of trying to do a little something different to help mankind before I leave this earth. So that's our story.
Thank you, Gary. Hadi, want to go next?
Sure, I think we tie in very well. Gary's systems and what he's doing with the hemp and putting it through pyrolysis and creating the energy is something along the line that Pure Life Carbon has been working on in different techniques. As you mentioned earlier, with Pure Life Carbon Inc., we are the first and only world sustainable grow media that is available on the market that's also reusable. But the process in which we take, or at least a portion of the process in which we take to create our product, goes through a process called pyrolysis. And that's traditionally the creation of energy or destruction of waste. But what we've done is use that as one part of our process to create our final feedstock. So we're able to go into a forestry management position with our original feedstock, work that area, make sure that it's sustainable, also make sure that the animal well-being and the environment is protected within those regions. We're able to help prevent and stop some poaching by creating the forest that we do. And then we put our product through a process which eventually goes through pyrolysis and some post-treatment in order to be able to create our flagship product, Charged Carbon, that is used as a standalone substrate within indoor agriculture. And it can be used within any product, whether that's hemp, cannabis, fruits, vegetables, ornamental flowers, anything grown indoors. And the benefit to it is that unlike other medias like stone wool, which is extremely carbon intensive in its creation and just as carbon intensive in its destruction, peat moss, which contributes about 9% of the global greenhouse gases at this point in time, is used in 60% of the grow facilities, which is detrimental. And then we have cocoa coir, which is probably the most sustainable, but still not very sustainable product on the market, that are impacting us. So the longer we use these, the harder it's going to be for us to be able to become carbon neutral. The EU has recognized this by banning peat moss and rock wool from indoor horticulture by 2030. They're also making mandatory recirculatory systems in water and feeding by 2027, which is very important when it comes to energy and consumption on the planet. but the current substrates that are available on the market are a detriment to those systems. So we've come in to look at replacing that. There's about 60 million cubic meters of grow media that's transported around the world on an annual basis, which is very carbon intensive as well, as it crosses oceans, with the cocoa coir coming from Sri Lanka, peat moss being distributed around the world, and stone wool mostly made in Europe. There's a lot of transportation. What we found in the last few years with our research is that we use about 1/5 of the material as those other substrates. So if we can take the current 60 million cubic meters of product that's transported around the world right now and reduce that down to 1/5, we have another impact in reducing carbon around the world. So our substrate is not only effective within the grow industry, but it also helps the planet in a lot of different areas. And those carbon credits are being developed as we speak, because there are certain pathways that have already been developed, but because of the reusability of our product and the multiples and the factors that other people can't participate in because of the design of their product, we are now developing those pathways to future carbon credits and feel that we have a multiple on ours at about a 9 to a 15 times multiple, in consideration where the highest current carbon credit is about a 3-time multiple. So our future is looking very bright when it comes to helping growers become more sustainable, reusable, and reduce the impact all the way around the world from substrates.
Thank you, Hadi. Very interesting. Forrest, would you go next, and then Constant, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate, like everyone else said, having us on the panel today, and those who are taking the time to log in and watch. So my name is Forrest Cohn. What Utopian Power does is we focus on renewable energy generation, whether that is solar plus storage, or other type of cogeneration. Specific to renewable energy and cannabis, we are doing a lot of development with municipalities, state entities, as well as commercial operations. And we are continuing to try to focus that into the growing and booming industry of the cannabis operators in general. As Janet mentioned earlier, we're also focused on bringing the monetary, connecting the projects with the monetary requirements and the money behind getting them developed. So really what we're focused on is bringing these renewable energy sources that are not necessarily brand new technologies. They're growing technologies. They're things that are beginning more and more defined and more refined in recent years, and applying those technologies to industries like the cannabis industry that has a major avenue for growth, as well as appetite for energy consumption throughout the life cycle of the product. So we're trying to get into this now and maintain, help maintain the operators in the cannabis industry, set up their operations in a sustainable manner, which will allow them to succeed over time.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Forrest. And Constant, last but certainly not least.
Thank you everyone for having us on, and green to have a nice early morning webinar. It's evening here in South Africa. So I'm also having a coffee in solidarity with everyone who's watching early. I am the director and co-founder of Agri-Smart Engineering. We are essentially an agri-tech company. We develop technologies in the cannabis cultivation space aimed at mitigating anthropogenic climate change. I think what's really wonderful about the cannabis industry is that it brings all of us together. It's an industry that really brings together all nationalities, but we have similar challenges across the board as well. And the biggest challenge is sustainability. Our mission is to get cultivation as efficient as possible. I think Janet said it really nicely when she spoke. The big thing is people want cannabis, they want the markets to boom, but that means on the ground level, we still have cultivation. It is the bedrock and the foundation of the industry. And that is, where we see our part in making a sustainable contribution. We try and develop technologies that give cannabis cultivators as much a chance as possible to get to net zero, where people, brilliant people like Hadi, Forrest, and Gary can take over the heavy lifting and really get cannabis cultivators off the grid. So essentially, our main technological outputs, like Janet already mentioned, are LED lighting for artificial and supplemental applications, distributed measurement systems. So this is data management systems that are able to move around in your grow space and have a very low power draw, that work on open source micros. And are really power efficient as well. And then the recirculating hydroponic systems. I think, as Hadi also mentioned in his piece about the substrates, we have to be cognizant of our water use footprint. Coming from Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, we are devastated by anthropogenic climate change. I think that, climate change is a reality that's facing us today, and we can't shirk away from it. I think that we'd have to atone to our, eventual descendants as to why we didn't stand up and do the right thing and develop a sustainable industry, instead of just trying to take shortcuts and make a lot of money. The goal for the industry is obviously to have as long a possible period of prosperity. This isn't just a thing that needs to happen for 10 or 20 years. This is where people see job creation and sustainable job support for decades to come, especially, as Janet mentioned, in the African context. South Africa's got a good climate for it, and our government has sort of made it part of the strategic economic recovery plan of our continent, especially right after the devastating effects of COVID, right after fossil fuel price increases, especially what's happening in Eastern Europe at the moment. So a lot of incentives for us to develop a green industry, and we're just really excited to be part of it. And thanks for having us on.
Well, since I put you last to introduce yourself, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Let's put you first in asking you questions, Constant, if you don't mind. You're right.
No, I'm ready. I'm ready. I've been awake the longest, so.
Oh, what time is it there now?
No, it's about 5:20 p.m., so it's not too bad.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. One of the materials I read about, or articles I read about Agri-Smart Engineering, mentioned that you look at a matrix of factors for cannabis cultivation. What are those factors, and are they factors that are equally applicable to other countries across the world?
Thanks for the question, Janet. I think the matrix of factors are quite simple. You have to look at a physiological level, what it is that the plants need. The first thing is it needs energy. That drives photosynthesis. So also when setting up a cannabis cultivation operation, you need to be cognizant whether or not you're doing it outside, in a greenhouse, or indoors. The reason I'm saying this is because then a lot of these parameters might be artificial, completely artificial, or they may be in supplementation to what already exists in your natural cultivation environment. So the first thing you look at is energy, and that is where a big bulk of the carbon footprint actually lies. The big dirty secret about our industry is the type of lighting we use. I think, due to the way cannabis has traditionally been prohibited, a lot of the cultivation is moved indoors, and this is not in line with the natural development of the plant itself, and it's not in line with the sustainable model necessarily. So when you do provide only an artificial light source, the onus is on you to provide that light source as efficiently as possible. So what we consider when looking at a light source, and I think this is one of the biggest problems with scaling the industry as well, is that a lot of the tech has been designed and developed with too much a modular approach. The appetite for cultivation is voracious. So shareholders are expecting massive cannabis plantations, but the engineering doesn't always scale. So when you look at the type of grow lights, and traditionally, especially in your jurisdiction, these would be high intensity discharge or HID fixtures, namely your high pressure sodium and your metal halide. And even the footprint of modern LEDs, they're not very big. People sort of talk about a 4x4 or 5x5 spread per light fixture as a rule of thumb. And even though this is not the way you should set up a lighting design for facility, it speaks to the way that the people who have developed this technology have thought about the problem of cultivation. Essentially, what you need to do is you need to cover as big an area as possible, as uniformly as possible, and deliver the required amount of photons, because now we're talking about photosynthetic active radiation, which is called PAR, and that is measured in micromoles. You're talking about photons of light energy in specific wavelengths, and that's what the plant needs to drive photosynthesis. And you need to get this to the canopy as efficiently as possible. That's the first requirement in lighting. The second requirement is got to do with nutrition. That has got to do, ties into, especially Hadi will mention how you use your substrates, which kind of substrates you're using, what your mechanisms are for nutrient delivery, whether or not you're doing a drain to waste, whether or not you're doing a recirculating system or closed loop system. It's also important to note that the nutrient requirement is cultivar dependent, it is strain dependent, and it is hormonal phase dependent. And in that hormonal phase, you know, you've got leeway for how far is my plant along in veg or in flower. So it's something that constantly changes. It's very, very dynamic. So you need to think about what it is your plant needs to drive, you know, the photosynthesis along with the light. And what you'll find is often you've got limiting reagents. This is where, in the case of light and cannabis, the limiting reagent is actually carbon. So there's a lot of talk about carbon fixing. And this is probably the only or one of the biggest advantages of having an artificial environment as opposed to a natural environment, because you're able to have more control over your cultivation parameters. And one of these that lifts that cap of your rate limiting step, that is carbon. And that's why people often supplement their cultivation environments with CO2. They call that carbon fertigation or CO2 dosing, depending where you're from. And that really means that you can use more light, which drive the biological processes quicker, okay? And you then need to match that nutrient requirement with your increased photosynthetic activity. That's what it's all about. And then the last thing that you're looking about in your environment is the actual evapotranspiration gradient. So essentially, the mechanism for cannabis plants to utilize nutrients is they draw irrigation water through their roots. And then inside of their stems, they've got two sort of concurrent parallel channels called the xylem and the phloem. And the one is for the transpiration. So essentially, it draws up the irrigation solution and it loses moisture through little pores in its epidermis called the stomata. And the measure of how open or how closed the stomata are is very heavily influenced by what is called your vapor pressure deficit. This is essentially the gradient for transpiration. So what it means is if it's too dry, your stomata will close up. And even though your lighting's good, your carbon's good, your nutrient solution's good, there will be no gradient for the plant to take water through its system and lose that moisture, and then from there translocate nutrients to where it needs. So essentially it goes on a hunger strike. So it's really something that you need to be really aware of. And if it's obviously, if it's too wet and there is no gradient, the exact same thing happens. So it's about balancing that. So in essence, to answer your question, the matrix can be summarized as follows. Number one, energy, the quality and the quantity of your light that the plants are getting. Number two, nutrition. Are they getting the essential macronutrients? Are they getting their secondary nutrients? Are they getting their micronutrients? Are these nutrients in the right ratios? Okay, because that also affects nutrient availability. Then you have to look at the electrical conductivity or the ppm, the concentration of your solution, and also the pH level, which affects your nutrient availability. So even though the nutrients are there, they're not necessarily in a form that the plant can uptake them if your pH is wrong. Then you have to look at your environment, and then you have to create the ideal gradient for transpiration. And what AgriSmart essentially does is we zone in on these parameters. We set the set points of what we think the ideal parameters should be, or the ranges which they should be. And then we dial in our control systems to reject disturbances around these set points. So we'll make sure that the lighting intensity is always the same on the canopy. We'll make sure the humidity and the temperature, which influence the transpiration gradient, that is always correct. Then we'll look at our irrigation solution. We'll make sure that the concentration of the ions is available. We'll make sure that then the availability of those nutrients is right. And then we try and do it as efficiently as possible. So we look at what are the ways that people are doing this, and are there more efficient ways that people are doing this? And in all these cases, I think the answer to that question is yes. And that's sort of gotten us to where our sort of cultivation philosophy is based around. And that is, recirculating hydroponic systems with LED lights, which give off not a lot of heat, take the power draw of your HVAC as well. And then having a really good idea of what's going on in your cultivation environment, because you'll have many different microclimates developing, and it's not necessarily always suitable to say, I'm going to let an entire control system have one specific control action based on only one data point from the sensor feedback in one place in your facility. So it's about getting a high density sensor map. And then from there, having I don't want to say you just need to stick with it, because then it's still not easy, but then you just stick with it and you do the best you can. So that's what I would summarize the grid as being.
Fantastic. Thank you. Constant, I had no idea there was so much science behind really agriculture. As we were talking about before this webinar started, my family farm in Indiana certainly doesn't do any of this analysis. So I think you've got to be their first customer.
Yeah, I think, what it comes down to is as more people enter the market, the competition is certainly going to increase. And with that, as the markets reach maturity, you'll find that now all of a sudden there's this element of compliance where you have to comply to the jurisdiction of other markets in your cultivation and your post-processing. And this is expensive. So all of a sudden you've got this environment where the competition is heating up, which means your price per gram, your cost-effective production needs to be on a competitive level, especially if you're going to accommodate that compliance. So it really becomes a scenario of having to look at these factors objectively and looking at whether or not you're meeting these criteria and how efficiently you're meeting this criteria. Because at the end of the day, if you lose your competitive ability in the marketplace, I think in a matter of time, because the overhead is so expensive, you'll find yourself in a position where you won't participate in the market anymore. And that's not good for anyone.
Thank you. Let me turn to a similar topic, Hadi's Pure Carbon's charged carbon product. Frankly, to me, it sounds like the title of a sci-fi movie. And you'll laugh at this, but I did research charged carbon in movies, and all I found was Altered Carbon, a 2018 movie starring Anthony Mackie and others about a prisoner who had been kept on ice for 250 years, returning to life in a new body with one chance to win his freedom. So what really is charged carbon, Hadi?
Well, that's an interesting way to go. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's an interesting way to take a look at that. But you know what? At the same time, it is something that is coming back. And you talk about something that's been on ice for 2,000 years and not being really utilized. It is what's happening. So a lot of people in the world today are very familiar with products called biochar. And biochar is basically the destruction of waste or creation of energy that is an organic matter, which can include any product, including human waste, a body, or animal waste, animals, wood waste, all that sort of thing. And hemp can be considered biochar as well. What we've done is we've taken that industry and really created a product that is specifically designed for its end use. So we're in the midst of standing up a brand new category, which is called advanced carbons. And advanced carbons are going to move the conversation forward in order to be able to identify what products should be used in what categories. Biochar is only available in certain percentages when augmented or mixed with soils, generally because of the toxicity of the product, the pH, and a number of contributing factors that don't make it 100% beneficial to the soil. So Pure Life Carbon has worked with Dr. Nick Savada at the College of Lethbridge for over 18 years developing our product Charged Carbon. And that took a look at a feed source, which we researched over 1,500 different varieties of plants around the world to find a sustainable feed source that was going to be able to replace the 60 million cubic meters of grow media that's available on the market today. Now, when we found that feedstock, we also had to identify the right time to harvest it so that it had the molecular structure that we were looking for. It's just not about putting a product into use, but it's making sure that its use is actually designed for culture. So in the horticultural industry, it's important for our carbon to be extremely porous and have a lot of different available pore sizes in order to be able to hold on to beneficial microbials, nutrients, minerals, moisture, and air in a ratio that's going to benefit the plant. So again, we've taken a feedstock, we decided how to chip it, process it, and prepare it to go through pyrolysis, which is the putting the product through an extreme heat process with the absence of oxygen, which then pulls everything out of the product and leaves us with a carbon shell. After that, that's our base formula, which we call absolute carbon. And that's what it is, absolutely just carbon. And we can use that with soil augmentation and outdoor programs in order to be able to increase moisture, reduce compaction around the root zones, and increase the carbon within the soil itself. And is actually where we put our charged carbon at end of life. So we've take absolute carbon, we put it through an additional process where we create our pH balanced 5.5 to a 6 pH in our charged carbon product. We've eliminated every compound within that, so all you're left with is carbon and a little bit of phosphorus and an extremely porous shell for the plants to be able to tap into. And literally they tap into the carbon shell in order to be able to use each shell as a fridge for them to be able to grab the food that they need at when they need it. So we have a beautiful balance within the root system where we've got about 60% oxygenation, we've got about 60% moisture retention within the carbon shell, and we have the outside of the carbon shell, which is actually hydrophobic, which then prevents the growth of algae and other pathogens on the surface of the material, protecting it from pests and pathogens to come in and actually create an environment of negativity. And growers have been in a position for a number of years, and in the trials that we're against, we compete against the Stonewall products of the market, the peat moss and cocoa coir. They've been around for a number of years, and people have just learned to live with the issues that they cause, which is no longer acceptable. The first issue that they cause is extreme carbon input into the environment. Rock wool, for a ton of rock wool, it takes about 3 tons of carbon to create. It takes another 3 tons of carbon to destroy, if not even more, because it's about 50 million BTUs that it requires to heat the product up to get rid of it. And then peat moss contributes 9% of the global greenhouse gases, and we continue to use it. Both those products, along with cocoa coir, have a tendency of forming algae and pathogens on the surface. So then you're using a xylitol or a hydroxyl or something to clean that material off, which then again affects the plant and the production that you're doing. With our carbon product, we eliminate those issues, and we actually create an environment that's beneficial for the root development. And instead of growing, really fine root hairs, the water roots that typically grow in other substrates, we develop really, really fine root hairs. And to promote the growth of the plant, you need to promote the growth of the root system. So even though we use an extremely low volume of material, our traditional cannabis grower is only growing in 1/2 gallon or 2 liters of charged carbon, where in a lot of cases, they're growing anywhere from 2 gallons to 15-gallon pots. So it's a multiple, several times over. But because of the design of the material that we did, and again, earlier I mentioned the porosity is extremely important. And the reason is that we want a massive amount of surface area for microbials and beneficial bacteria to develop in order to be able to help create the plant's root zone. So as much as we like the nutrients and minerals going into it, we need the beneficial microbials in there as well to promote that plant health. So with the porosity of the material, our surface area, if you were to flatten out 1 gram of our product and you were to flatten it out and make all the surface available for you to see, it would cover almost 3/4 of an acre of land. And if you can imagine 1 gram of material covering 3/4 of an acre of land, you can hold that in the palm of your hand. So when you take a look at a half a gallon, or like I said, 2 liters of our material, you have over 60,000 acre or 6,500 acres of surface area within a 2-liter pot of our material, which gives you a massive amount for your roots to develop in and allows it to carry the plant all the way through harvest. The best part about it though is it's reusable. So the other products in the market like stone wool, rock wool, and peat are a one and done use. And when they go into the landfill or they go to get destroyed, they actually release their NPK into the environment and into our groundwater, creating issues of algae blooms. Last year in Maine and Massachusetts, eastern seaboard, there was a lot of lakes and a lot of rivers that had green and blue algae blooms. A lot of this has to do with the NPK that's leaching into the soils from agricultural industry. Yeah. So we need to protect that. With our material, we can reuse it several times. We're looking at a 10-year lifespan. And then after that period of time, we would like to take that product back and for final remediation, use it in turf management, use it in open field augmentation for vineyards in order to be able to get the vine crops healthier in the fields. Parks, recreation, urban landscaping, all can benefit from our product going in to help the root zone and put that carbon back into the soil where it belongs. So at the end of the day, Pure Life Carbon was designed and founded in order to be able to displace these carbon intense medias in a system that is actually self-power generating. So even in our pyrolysis that we put our material through, we actually pull syngases off of it. We create an energy and a self-sustaining system that powers our system as well. So while we're creating our feedstock, we aren't using any energy. We're actually sequestering about 3.6 ton of carbon out of the atmosphere for every 1 ton of our product that we produce. So again, having another positive impact on the environment. Now you take that, you displace rock wool, you displace peat, you displace cocoa coir, and we can identify what that carbon impact is, and then we can use that as a multiple again for 10 years. We have a cannabis grower who's 26 cycles into our media in a regenerative bed and still hasn't had to replace or he's done a little bit of a top up, but again, it's been a clean media for him to use, and it's just gotten better and better every time he uses it because the beneficials keep building up and maintaining a really healthy root zone. So, for the future of sustainability and indoor agriculture, we need to look at the substrates and how they impact our industry, as well as how they create the environment that you can look after. As Constance mentioned earlier, it's the entire ecosystem that has to work together, or else we're never going to attain the carbon neutrality that we're looking for. So we have to look from our substrate all the way up to the lighting systems and how we build the facilities in order to be able to hit a goal that's going to actually make us sustainable. We don't want to be the dirty little secret anymore. We want to be the clean environment that cannabis is known for. It's a healthy plant. Let's make the environment healthy in its utilization.
Let me now move from the ground and ground concerns into partnering among various entities, governments, power companies, and even banks. Forrest, Utopian Power has successfully partnered with a Michigan bank and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources to finance Utopian's projects, supplying clean solar for parks and facilities. These strategic alliances and strategic planning come to mind to describe your relationship with other industries, not necessarily involved in cultivation or in cannabis or even in clean tech. Are you expanding your alliances within Michigan or outside of Michigan, outside of governmental entities who might be interested in clean tech?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. And absolutely, we are. I think one thing that's lacking within the renewable energy industry and the cannabis industry combined is the effort to implement these technologies in the day-to-day operations. The professional entities that are offering this type of service to the industry are lacking. It's more difficult of an industry to get financed. Everyone in the industry knows that. It's a little bit more difficult and to set up the long-term operations because there's some unknowns that are in place with policy and local state-by-state changes of policy on a regular basis. So, you know, what we at Utopian Power do, we're focused on this industry, and yeah, it takes a little bit more work up front, a little bit more of a headache to get some of this stuff financed long-term. But as you mentioned, we're currently working with state governments, local municipalities to get this type of work completed. And we're working with local banks, private investors, to bring all of these aspects together to allow this implementation on a low cost, no capital upfront charge to customers. Within the renewable energy, the cannabis space, there is a lot of demand and growing demand for energy, whether, no matter what type of energy that is. We're talking about carbon energy and lighting, and Constance offering there. But really, what Constance mentioned is what we'll like to push as well, is that over time, you must reduce your overhead costs. You must reduce your costs today and into the future to be a sustainable business. And sustainability is something that's mentioned quite often now, but sustainability isn't just in power or in cultivation. It is in sustainability of your business over time, the ability to sustain and provide a long-term value as a business to keep yourself afloat and successful in your business. So yes, we like to play the middleman role to some extent between technologies, between finance, construction, and development to bring these projects to light. There's a lot of money and focus right now on new technologies and game-changing technologies, disruptive technologies, but at some point those technologies must be applied in the field. And a company like us, that's what we're focused on doing, is taking these technologies that need to be drastically scaled in operation, in real life use, and putting them in the field and allowing it to do that. So whether that's an off-grid, standalone microgrid, or working with the local utility under their current policies and what they allow you to do from a generation, a cogeneration standpoint, a distributed generation standpoint, that's where we're looking to provide value. And there's multiple different ways to get these type of projects financed. The renewable or the cannabis industry takes a little bit of a more creative solution, but nonetheless they're there. So there's a lot of folks focused on this across the globe, and the opportunity is to bring a known technology like solar or storage, or to Gary's point, the cogeneration to these technologies is a viable thing that can be done, and that's what we're focused on doing and will continue to do in the future.
I've heard from cannabis clients that they may have limited dollars to invest in new technology. They've already invested in technology, but the technology keeps changing. We all say that because we know that through experience. What factors would you advise a company's executives to consider in making an investment in, say, renewable energy rather than, for example, real estate?
Yeah, certainly. I think you can combine those type of investment choices as well. As you add real estate, look to choose something that allows you to bring renewables on. And certainly there can be some upfront costs that are quite expensive, but you can also avoid that. Some of the stuff we're doing with municipalities and other entities, even commercial entities, are that we are providing the capital to bring these power projects online, and they will produce power for an X amount of years. They are warranted to do so. The technology is proven, and it will provide value, not just today, but into the future of your business, to the future of your real estate. So if you're adding buildings to your real estate, and you know that, hey, if I add X amount of value here, I can always use this for, some sort of equity. The power projects will do the same type of thing. So while you may see a smaller year-over-year ROI than some other type of investments, you will see a guaranteed long-term impact to your business, providing sustainable operations for the future of your business, not this year, not a payback over 3 years potentially, but a payback that will continue to feed your business viable profits and savings for 25 to 35 years.
Thank you. That's great. Gary, I don't want to run out of time, so we must feature you now. Gen Hemp uses biomass to generate heat and steam that in turn feeds turbines to produce electricity. Why has Gen Hemp partnered with a Bitcoin mining operation for energy production? Why not a municipality to heat schools, for example, or a business to produce widgets?
It's a good question. The electricity is pretty readily available in the United States, no matter where you are. And what we're trying to do is pick out little areas off the grid where the utility or co-op has excess power. And so as any business tries to achieve is a lower power cost. And so if we can take that watt of power that's stuck in a corner of a county and then utilize that power to generate Bitcoin mining operations at a lower cost, and that is a win-win for everybody. It wins for the utility and it wins for our business. Then if we can augment that power we're pulling off the grid with solar, with biomass, with wind, whatever it may be, to even further reduce it, then we begin to significantly reduce the carbon footprint. And I think this is so important for all businesses, because just yesterday, the SEC voted to propose regulations that would require all publicly traded companies to report their greenhouse gas emissions. And this is the first time that companies are facing mandatory disclosure rules. And so we've seen it, as I was in the fossil fuels business for close to 40 years. We've seen the major oil companies start to shift to renewables. We're seeing banks not lending to fossil fuel businesses. We're seeing institutions like Harvard and Yale, Dartmouth not giving funds to oil and gas companies, investors, what have you. Even though we have $100+ oil today, the industry is way out of favor. So what is that telling us? It's telling us that people want something sustainable. They want something renewable. They want something that can keep the environment clean. So what we're trying to do is take those years of experience in a fossil fuels business and convert them into a renewable slash Bitcoin. So why Bitcoin? Bitcoin's hot in favor. All of us on this call have to raise capital, whether we're growers, whether we're midstream companies, what have you. And so having a company that is interesting to the investing public, whether it be renewables, whether it be Bitcoin, whether it be biomass, whether it be hemp, whatever it may be, that's what you try to do, is you try to weave your way through the corporate maze to make yourself attractive to investors so that you can raise capital.
Thank you. Interesting. It's interesting also that I noticed that release yesterday from the SEC, and I'm wondering how many companies will take that to heart, and if the rules are adopted in a similar form, do you think disclosure these disclosure rules would disrupt the marketplace?
Oh, it's coming. I think it's going to be absolutely mandatory. And you're seeing, you know, the head of BlackRock. Here's the guy that is telling companies, if you don't start cleaning up the environment and lowering your carbon footprint, then we're not going to invest in you. Here's the largest private equity fund in the world. So, you know, it's coming. Banks are saying it, government's pushing it. And so here is another example of, it didn't say voluntary, it's mandatory. So we're obviously out for public comments on how this is going to be. But so it's definitely coming down the pike. And I think more and more companies are taking note. Committees on boards are getting more active. What can we do? How can we show that we're not, you know, a big carbon user and hurting the environment? So there's definitely been a fundamental mental change, I think, in corporate America, and that tidal wave is moving.
It's great. Great to hear. So we have very little time left, but Gary, first, give us your prediction. How is Cleantech and cannabis going to change, say, in 5 years?
Well, obviously, I'm going to focus more on hemp because that's what we're involved in, but,
yes,
which, as you know, is part of the cannabis plant. But the thing that gets me so excited about hemp is that, you know, this is a plant that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. It was just outlawed in the United States for about 80-year period. We're seeing so many new products coming out. Hemp concrete, insulation using hemp to replace asbestos. BMW is making car panels out of hemp. We're seeing houses, planes. The material it's a phenomenal material in that it's 10 times stronger than steel, pound for pound. It can grow in 90 to 120 days. It's just a carbon negative plant. It sucks out all the bad stuff out of the air and out of the soil. Picks up the pesticides and the herbicides and the lead. I mean, it's just a very cleansing plant. So I don't think we've even begun to touch the surface. You're now seeing Levi Strauss with hemp jeans. Patagonia's got a whole hemp line. You know, it's just coming. And where we're trying to sort of fill the void is be the middleman, try to put the farmers and the end users together and bring that together, because our business is so fragmented. Farmers won't grow because we can't sell the product, and textile companies won't use it because we can't get the product. I mean, it's so fragmented, and it's going to take time, but it's definitely, I think, a very, very exciting space that is new. I mean, how often do you get a product that's been outlawed for 80 years and all of a sudden is legal? I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yep. Thank you. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. Lola, I'm handing the mic back to you to close.
Thank you so very much, Janet, and thank you, Hadi and Constant and Gary and Forrest. As the industry heads in the greener direction, it's exciting to hear directly from you and to find out how each of you positions their company to meet the new challenges and how you see the future. We hope that this discussion continues and we meet again on the intersection of clean tech and cannabis. And in case some of our attendees joined us a little bit late, here with us today were again the moderator, Janet Jackim of Zuber Lawler, Gary Evans of Generation Hemp, Constant Beckerling of Agri-Smart Engineering, Hadi Feltham of Pure Life Carbon, and Forrest Cohn of Utopian Power. Many thanks for this engaging conversation.